بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسول الأمين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين وبعد. I tell you what, if you boys were on the wall there, if you can at least go on the wall that way, so you're not behind me, I can keep an eye on you. Thank you. So we last time we were here, we discussed the victory of Ajnadin, the Battle of Ajnadin, which was 32,000 Muslims, the greatest army of Muslims to date, and an estimated 90,000 of the Romans or the Byzantines. And it was a victory for Muslims and a major defeat for the Byzantines. And al-Waqidi, he reports that the number of losses for the Byzantines was 50,000 thereabouts, so more than half the army. And remember, the Roman military machine is a established machine. It's not a small, haphazard, random gang. No, they still make movies about them. In any case, the Muslims suffered minimal losses, alhamdulillah. But the result caused the Heraclius, who was in Hims at the time, who was still in today's Syria, to retreat back to his capital, or his administrative capital, Antioch, which was further in Turkey, just to distance himself from the threat of Muslims. And remember, if the head of the empire were to fall, then it would cause chaos. So it was prudent that he looked after himself, because he represented the Byzantine Empire. And 3 days after the battle, Khaled ibn al-Waleed wrote to Al-Khalifa Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu anhu, informed him of the great victory, and he was instructed not to advance beyond the borders of Syria, beyond the borders of Sham, not to enter into Turkey or to deep into Turkey, not to enter in, or today's Turkey, not to enter into deep into the Byzantine Empire, but to consolidate Sham. So for this reason, the Muslims then started advancing on Damascus. And they passed Damascus on the way. So Ajnadin is further past Damascus. Remember, we said that Khalid ibn Walid paused there for some hours, observing Damascus from afar, and that this would be known as the Eagle Pass, because it had the banner of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The eagle banner was waving in the wind. So now they have started to move to Damascus, to lay siege to Damascus, which was one of the glorious cities of the empire. It is a great city. It's always been a great city in history. It's cradle of civilization, a center for trade, a center of civilization, always has been, or as long as we can remember. So it was a great city indeed. And to lose the city would strike a devastating blow to the prestige of the empire. Because if this empire were unable to protect one of its great cities, what do you think the impact would be on the morale of the empire? It's not something that you can hide from common knowledge. It would cause a public stir. It would place the Muslims on a high pedestal, in a high position, and opposingly weaken the resolve and the might of the Byzantine Empire, which is not a great thing, you know. So anyway, the Muslims start to advance to Damascus, and Heraclius, and I looked it up, it is Heraclius. He sought to mobilize whatever he could, whatever troops he could, to uh, to reinforce the the garrison in Damascus. The garrison at the time had 12,000 troops. It wasn't a city that that was prepared for a siege, because the only threat to the Byzantines were the Persians. And only several years prior did the Byzantines defeat the Persians. So there was no threat to Damascus, which was relatively far from the Persian Empire, relatively, which such there could be no surprise attack. And as such, it was not prepared for a siege. It wasn't prepared to be attacked. It wasn't prepared to face really any significant enemy. So now they're rushing to bolster its defenses and prepare to meet the Muslims. And now, reeling off a significant defeat, and he himself now Heraclius distancing himself from the Muslims, he sought to mobilize whoever he could afford to bolster the defenses. So from those who managed to escape Ajnadin, he put together a force of about 4,000 warriors, and their objective was to delay the Muslim advance in order that more provisions could arrive Damascus and they could have more time to prepare. And while this was happening, he was also trying to collect as many troops as possible to make their way to to Damascus and be within the fort. It's a fortified city. And this was without calling on all the garrisons throughout the empire. That would only be done when the empire was at the highest level of threat. This was the first major loss to Muslims. So it had not reached that threat of survival now. Only were they at a threat of survival would they call all the garrisons across the entire empire to come to face their enemy, which they will do shortly. In any case, the Muslims are moving, and this force of 4,000 is nothing in the face of the Muslims. It did not delay them, it did not do anything really. But nevertheless, the detachment or a battalion of 5,000 men managed to reach Damascus before the Muslims reached there. And it was led by, so Damascus was governed by the son-in-law of Heraclius. So it was high, they married his daughter, indicating just how prestigious this place was. And Thomas had grown up, had spent his time in Arabia. He knew Arabic language, he knew the Arabs well, he knew their customs. He was loved to an extent, you may say. And the leader of the garrison was a true and tried general called Azaziz or Adadir, who was well known to have defeated the Persians and had never lost a duel, and was named, in their language, after the angel of death. So he had a great reputation as a warrior. And the detachment, the battalion that made its way, that came to reinforce the Damascus, was led by a general called Kulus. And he was another mighty general. But him and Azaziz did not get along. They did not like each other. And they would only cooperate uh, as was required. And if one were to fall, they would not cause, what do you call this? One would not lose sleep over the loss of the other. And this will also play its part. This division, by the way, this division, this second guessing, this division, a weakness when there is, when things don't seem to be going your way, this is a very dangerous thing. And we've said in the past that Allah has decreed, Allah has written already, that Muslims will never lose if they fight for Islam. If they fight for Allah, they will never lose. So meaning it is always a Muslim who betrays the Muslims. And this is the reality. It is always a Muslim who will betray Muslims and open the door for the enemies of Islam to do what they will with Muslims. That's why it's very important to develop this good brotherhood, to develop the good bonds of fraternity, of ukhuwah, of mu'akhat, and to do it for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, inshallah. May Allah make us a strong ummah, inshallah. So now, we're just going to disregard that 4,000 troops who came to delay the Muslims, because they did not delay them. In any case, now the number of the garrison in Damascus had reached 17,000. Now those 5,000 of these troops then moved out of Damascus to meet the Muslims in a battlefield far from, about 12 miles from Damascus, because they don't want to wage war in a prized city that would cause lots of damage. And the city is not geared. It is not geared up. They're not prepared for a siege. They're not prepared for war. So instead, they will try to wage war outside. That was their strategy. And this took place in a place called Marja Sufar, or the Yellow Meadow. Again, 12 miles from Damascus. Now, the Muslim army was moving in its different battalions towards advancing to Damascus, but they were moving at different paces, at different speeds. And in the front of the army was what we call the mobile guard, or the advance guard. They are the ones who will respond quickly. They are all mounted on horses. They are usually like the commandos, the elite, you may say, right? Or among the elite. And they were led by Khaled ibn al-Waleed. So they are there now, and they have met an army, preventing them from reaching their goal of laying siege to Damascus and preparing for battle. And in this advance guard was 4,000 Muslims. And these 4,000 were largely made up, they were the Khalid ibn Waleed's battalion who came from Persia. And who remembers the number that came from Persia? There were 9,000. So with him now is 4,000 of this elite, trialed, tested battalion who are now about to wage war with the enemy. And Khalid ibn Waleed is outnumbered, not by much, but he's outnumbered nonetheless. And the Byzantine army is a prominent military force. So what does he do is that he wishes to delay the engagement so that the remainder of the army can catch up. So they motion into their standard positions. The standard position is the center and two wings, right? And they signal for duels. So you have the psyche of the time, the traditions of the time was that duels were respected, and it also played on the key of the the warriors. Is that if I were, this is my pride here, one on one, I can beat the other. We are the Byzantine Empire. We have routed the the strongest empire in the world. Who were these barbarians? All of that mentality, all that psyche is there in their decision to duel. And the Muslims are like, no, this is what we do. This is our opportunity, either that we dispatch an enemy of Allah or we return to Allah, whatever it may be. So that is exactly what they did, is that they would one by one duel. And of course, among those who dueled was Dirar ibn Azwar, radiallahu an, who dispatched many of their warriors. So this again there was no Muslim fell. Every Byzantine champion who came to face the Muslims was returned to their creator. And after they would win their duel, because this is happening in front of the two armies, yeah? So they would ride their horse along the front lines of the enemy, and then try to anybody stand out of line. If there was any vulnerability, they would dispatch them as well. So their duel, win the duel, and then boast about their victory, to increase the morale of Muslims and to decrease the morale of the enemy. And while doing so, to egg them on, if you will, whatever it may be, anybody stand out of line, right? Return to Allah, or weakened at the least. So the Muslims are gaining the upper hand in this regard and buying time. And we said that Azaziz and Kulus, they don't have any love for each other. So what does Azazir, with a ra, Azazir say to Kulus? He says, why don't you battle their champion, Khalid ibn Waleed? So Khalid ibn Waleed, he comes and he approaches and he has a phrase that he says, by which he is identified, and also by which hopefully to break the morale of the enemy. So he says, he goes to the center of the battlefield. He says, I am the pillar of Islam. I am the companion of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I am the noble warrior, Khalid ibn Waleed. So Azazir says, it's unbecoming that their champion comes and presents himself, and he is not meant with an equal champion. And Kulus, his will to fight had already reduced after seeing so many return to Allah without any gain. But not lose face with Azazir, right? He went on. So he went out and he sought to battle Khalid ibn Waleed. But Khalid ibn Waleed bested him very quickly and took him captive. He did not, he realized that he was a general, took him captive. And he went back out, and now Azazir had come out. And he was happy, actually, that Kulus was taken, and he wished that he would die. And Kulus, by the way, when he left Heraclius, he promises him that I will not return except with the head of Khalid ibn Waleed. Of course, it's what you say to the king. You're trying to, because if he does that, you imagine if he were to come and bring the head of the enemy, he would be honored. You have to understand, for them, it's about honor, it's about spoils, it's about their gain. It's not about Islam, it's not about truth, it's not about God, you may say, even if they may present it that way. Anyway, Aziz comes out, and he grew up in Arabia, he knows the Arabs well, and he was a highly skilled warrior. He had never lost. So this had given him some air of arrogance. He goes to the battle and he calls to Khalid ibn Waleed. He says, "Oh Arab brother, come near me so that I can ask you some questions. And Khalid ibn Walid replies, O enemy of Allah, come near me yourself, or I shall come and take your head. Azazir looked surprised, but urged his horse forward and stopped at a distance that no surprise attack could occur. And then he says, O Arab brother, what makes you come to fight in person? Do you not fear that if I kill you, your comrades will be left without a commander? So Khalid ibn Walid replies, O enemy of Allah, you have already seen what a few of my comrades have done. Remember, they had the duels and they won every battle. If I were to give them permission, they would destroy your entire army with Allah's help. I have with me men who regard death as a blessing and this life as an illusion. Anyway, who are you? He doesn't know who you are, who he is. And Azazir replies, do you not know me? I am the champion of Syria. I am the killer of Persians. I am the breaker of Turkish armies. I am named after the angel of death. I am Israel. So Khalid ibn Walid laughs. And he says, I fear that he after whom you are named seeks you ardently to take you to the abyss of hell. You are named after the angel of death. But I'm telling you, the angel of death is looking for you right now and he's going to take you to hell. So instead of having this psychological impact on Khalid, Khalid is reversing it. This is a psychological taunt now, trying to get into the head of the enemy, trying to demoralize them, get some type of some advantage over them. But Khalid ibn Walid it just bounces off him. He turns it around. In any case, he asks, what have you done with the prisoner Kulus? He says, he is held in irons. So he says, what prevents you from killing him? He is the most cunning of the Romans. And Khalid ibn Walid says, nothing prevents me except the desire to kill both of you together. So Azazir says, I shall give you 1,000 pieces of gold, 10 robes of brocade, and 5 horses if you will kill him and give me his head. Because he has no love for him. So Khalid says, is that the price for him? So what is the price for yourself? What is it? What do you sell yourself for? So Azazir asks, what is it that you seek? So he says, the jizya. The jizya means that you surrender and you pay tribute to the Muslims. Simple. Right? So this angered Azazir. He's like, no, what is this? And he says, as we rise in honor, as you fall in disgrace, defend yourself, for now I will kill you. All right. So now, as soon as those words were said, and Khalid realizing that now it is time for battle, he launched at him. Remember, they're in a talking distance here. Right? Launched at him and struck at him, for which Azazir parried without any effort. And it was so remarkable, so confident was Azazir in his defense that even the Muslims couldn't help but admire him. This is no normal warrior. Nobody has been able to stand against the Khalid ibn Walid. Not the Persian generals, not so far the Byzantine generals, nobody. And here is somebody who can parry Khalid's attacks without a second glance. So they're like, oh, what's going on here? This is going to be a real challenge. And even Khalid himself is surprised. This person knows what he's doing. He's not just all talk. He is indeed a champion. And then Azazir smiles and he says, by the Messiah, I could kill you if I wished, but I am determined to take you alive so that I may then release you on condition that you leave our land. This angered Khalid. Right? And he struck at Azazir once more, for which Azazir defended himself without issue. And Azazir views Khalid as not his equal. He views him as a lowly person. This is a person who's had battles, So what does he do? He wants to play around with Khalid, he wants to humiliate him. So he gallops with his horse back and forth along between the armies, and Khalid's chasing him, and he's unable to catch up with him. And Azazir is not fleeing, he's actually tiring the horse. He's causing that psychological defeat and humiliation of the commander, of the Muslims, of their enemy, in front of everybody. And if he were to be successful, it would encourage the Byzantines and demoralize the Muslims. That's his thinking. So Khalid realizes that his horse is out of puff now, and he's unable to catch up. And Azazir's horse is mighty, it's strong, it's not tired at all. So it's a greater steed, and he himself is in full composure, doesn't feel threatened at all. So Khalid ibn Walid dismounts. What can I do now? At this time now, Azazir is thinking, now I have him where I want him. Right? And he turns his steed and charges Khalid. Khalid with his sword. He swipes Khalid with his sword. So what Khalid does is that he moves only enough so that the sword that he would miss the sword, but without leaving a big gap, so that he wouldn't have to move a lot. And he steadied his legs, and he swung at the front legs of Azazir's horse. And it is reported that he swung with such might that he chopped both legs clean off. Both legs, not one, huh? So he chopped the two front legs of the horse of Azazir, a mighty horse, which caused the horse to fall. And the horse is in battle armor, and Azazir is in battle armor. And remember, the characteristics of the armor at the time was that the Muslims preferred rapid movement. So they were typically lighter in armor, whereas their enemies preferred protection and were often heavier. So the weight of the horse and Azazir in his armor bore on Azazir when he fell, which stunned him. And Khalid ibn Walid did not waste the opportunity. He pounced on him. Subhanallah. I don't know what you call this, maybe it is that when you're in the moment and you have that additional strength of being in the moment. There's a term for it, I can't remember what it is. Adrenaline, there you go, adrenaline. But definitely must be Allah's help. It is reported that he lifted the Azazir like this, above the ground, and threw him on the ground. So he fell to the ground. Before he could get up, he was grabbed by Khalid ibn Walid and pretty much grappling, lifted him and threw him on the ground again, thereby stunning Azazir. And then he grabs him by the back and in front of everybody carries him off. Walking, carries their general, their champion in front of everybody. Remember, there's been a spectacle. They've been watching Khalid ibn Walid chase this guy back and forth. Right? And so everybody's focused, everybody's tuned in. But instead of working for him, it worked against him. Now, the opposite result was that the Muslim, Khalid ibn Walid, radiallahu anh, managed to best his adversary, and took him alive to the Muslims. Upon that, he commanded the advance. Now, at that moment, the Muslims advance. And it was around that time, this happened only in a couple of hours, right? Of the Muslims seeing the enemy and then engaging in battle. So upon realizing that the front guard is facing an enemy, the Abu Ubaidah radiallahu, Amr ibn As and others, they mobilize their cavalry at speed to catch up with the mobile guard, with the front guard, sorry, and engage in battle. And it just so happened that at the time they then came and overwhelmed the enemy, slew many of them, but they also retreated. They also um, ran to the fort and sought sanctuary in the fort, for which, alhamdulillah, was a major victory, I guess, or moral victory at least for the Muslims. And now the Muslims in their full army have um, reached Damascus, and they lay siege to Damascus. Now, there's a few things to note. Is that, when you have a fortified city, it's not easy to break the defenses. And they, in the fort, have the advantage. So what Khaled ibn al-Waleed sought to do, knowing, according to his spies, that the city is not really geared up for a siege, that he wanted to, and he knew that Heraclius would certainly send reinforcements. So he stationed battalions on the expected route that any reinforcements would take in order to prevent them from reinforcing the siege, the Damascus. So he did that. 4,001 in one place, and 4,000 in another route from two different directions, and the rest were employed to siege Damascus, which had 5 gates. And these 5 gates, there were 5 different commanders tasked with, I'll say, not protecting, stationing themselves at these gates, each with about 3,000 or so warriors, al-Mujahideen. And then you had a mobile unit comprising 2,000, led by Dirad ibn Azwar, which would then move from one to another and support any one if needed. It was like a rapid movement. And Khalid ibn Walid held the central command at one of the gates with 400 of his warriors. And you have to understand that Khalid ibn Walid, he had what we call a general staff. So a general staff, he had a group of people who would collect intelligence, who would help him administer the army, who would help in the decision making, which he would not go into battle without. So he prized information, he prized intelligence, so that they could make good decisions with them capable warriors in order to lead any commando group if needed for side missions that could be critical in any particular battle. You have your main force, but if they're at a stalemate, if you're trying to get an advantage, maybe you need some other force to come and do these side missions or whatever it is, supporting missions, in order to change the tide of battle. So he always had these group of people with him. It's all right. I'm going to skip forward a little bit, inshallah, because we're focused on really the battles, really. So now, while this was happening, and they had laid siege, I think, for close to 3 weeks, with no real movement, the reports come from one of the garrisons, from the battalion stationed on the road from, I think, Edessa, that Heraclius has sent a garrison or reinforcements of 5,000. So the person so he says that we need to prevent these troops from reinforcing Damascus, but we also need to do so without the Damascenes or the inhabitants knowing that we have left, that a group has left, because in the armored people, the garrison, the actual warriors in Damascus was 16,000 at the time, and That's not including any civilian who would wish to take up arms. Okay? And the Muslims were about 20,000 once you take, when you consider the different battalions that had been dispatched for different purposes. Okay. So now Khalid ibn Walid wants to send a group of 4,000 to meet this this threat, but he doesn't want the others to know that the Muslims are reducing their number by 4,000. So he shifts, he makes a general shift of movements in general to disguise the fact that others are leaving. So whoever was stationed at this part of the fort looking upon these Muslims, this group of Muslims, with the movement, they would change who they recognize so they don't know who's who. And from there, he extracted a group of 4,000 led by Dirar ibn Aswar, and his 2 IC was Rafi' ibn Umayrah. And he says to Dirar, he says, do not be in haste, do not take unnecessary risks, all right? And if you need reinforcements, then call out, send for me. Okay. And Dirar ibn Azwar, there's no question about his valor and his courage. But remember, he's young. He's impetuous. So any question of restraint just skimmed over his head. So as soon as he got to the area stationed to prevent the advance of the Byzantines, he takes charge. He assumes the leadership, the command, and then he takes the 4,000 plus warriors, Mujahideen. They concealed themselves in a ravine on the route of the enemy, and as they pass, they surprise attack him. But these are people who are ready for war. They're not. They are moving with awareness. Right? They're not what you call unprepared. So they were prepared for any ambush. And they stood firm. Not only did they had structure. So although the Muslims attacked while the Byzantines were yet to enter into formation, these were elite warriors. So they managed to enter into formation before the Muslims engaged them, and thereby presenting a impregnable front. Instead of being ambush, it became a frontal assault now. And the Muslims did not have structure, whereas the non-Muslims, the Byzantines, had structure, and they were well equipped. Remember, Muslims prioritize movement, speed of movements. These ones had the armor, had the machinery to defend themselves. Okay, so Muslims did not record many advances, and slowly but surely, the Byzantines managed to surround or get to flank the Muslims, and whoever was caught into it was now surrounded. So many Muslims managed to, it's not flee, managed to escape that being surrounded, but their commander did not. So Dirar ibn Azwar, even though he fought fiercely and felled many, he took an arrow to his leg and he was captured. And because he fought in his iconic fashion without any upper protection, they recognized who he was. And because he was known now, he was notorious. He was known as a demon. So he was a great prize. So they decided that they would take him to Heraclius himself as a prize, as a moral victory for the Byzantines. Rafi' ibn Umayrah manages to escape being captured and sends for Khalid ibn Waleed, informs him of the news that Dirar had been captured. So Khalid himself now goes with another few thousand to support the Muslims and to stem this advance and to hopefully to recapture Khalid, or to rescue, sorry, Dirar ibn Aswar. So he moves with speed with his mobile guard, his advanced guard, those that can move fast, right? And that's what he does. And as he reaches the Rafi' ibn Umayrah, one who was with him, the Muslims and the Byzantines were engaged in battle, but they were at a stalemate. The Muslims are, mashallah, they're strong. So now they had more time now or they were not in such haste, and they could arrange themselves in proper structure, proper positions. They managed to present an obstacle that could not be defeated by the Byzantines, but they also could not defeat the Byzantines until Khalid ibn Walid came with reinforcements, and among them one who shoots, just keeps on running with the horse, galloping with the horse, and attacks the Byzantines with such ferocity and apparent lack of care for oneself. The Muslims were tired. They had been waging war for 2 days now, and with little success, with little loss as well, but also with little success. They were tired. And then they see this nimble rider darting in, felling one of the enemy, coming out, darting in again, back and forth, one after the other. Bloodied, wearing a green turban, sword bloodied, but back and forth. And this invigorated the Muslims. And Khalid ibn Walid, now assuming command, called for an advance. So now they encouraged, had found new motivation. They are now striking back with renewed vigor at the Byzantines. Fierce battle, during which those around Khalid ibn Walid get close to this warrior and say, "Oh, unknown warrior, your commander asked you to come." Right, Khalid ibn Walid. So upon hearing this, the warrior turns and runs away. Doesn't heed the call, enters into battle again, until the second time the commanders or those around Khalid ibn Walid calls for this warrior to come, saying, "Your commander has, called for you." Third time, and Khalid ibn Walid was there, he says, "Who are you, come?" Right? So unable to run away, the warrior then speaks to Khalid ibn Walid. And when the warrior speaks, it gives Khalid ibn Walid a shock that nearly fell him off his horse, because it was the voice of a woman. It was the voice of a woman. And this woman says, rahimahullah, she says, "I did not run away from you or heed your command except out of modesty, out of istihya, out of modesty of my position and of my respect for you, and in fear that you will prevent me from fighting." What is your name? My name is Khawla bint Aswar. You know this name? Khawla bint Aswar. I am the sister of Dirar ibn Aswar. And once I heard that my brother was captured, I could not but come to aid in his rescue. So Khalid ibn Walid says, "Okay then, let us together fight." So they re-enter and they engage in battle. So Khalid ibn Walid accommodates Khawla, who, by the way, right now the Khalifa is Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu. Soon the Khalifa will be Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu. Under the Khilafah Umar ibn Khattab gave Khawla her own battalion. She was the commander of a battalion, the first female commander, Khawla bint Aswar. Khalid ibn Walid is contemplating, he's actually remarking, having a bit of a smile, saying that the old man Aswar, the daughter of Aswar, he has not only given birth to one great warrior, but a second great warrior as well, not just from men, but also from women. And anyway, while they were engaged in battle, an Arab comes, a local Arab comes to Khalid ibn Walid, one of whom had entered into a pact of truce, a treaty, a jizya pact with the Muslims, and had informed that we have, remember, when Khalid ibn Walid enters into agreements with jizya, one of the requirements is that they would report on the movements of the enemy. It's one of the requirements that they would host Muslim warriors, right? They're traveling back and forth, right? And they would also report on the movements of the enemy. So they come to Khalid ibn Walid and inform him that they had seen a detachment of 100 warriors racing towards Turkey, to Antioch, where Heraclius was stationed. And with them was not bare naked, what's that? Bare-chested warrior, bare-chested person. So Khalid ibn Walid calls Rafi' ibn Umayrah and commands that 100 people go with him, and that they would race and try to get in front of this detachment. Among them were also Khawla, rahimahullah. I have to look up if she's Sahabiya or not. I have to double check. Most likely Sahabiya, but I'll check anyway. In any case, they managed to get in front of the Byzantines. They lay in wait, in ambush, managed to ambush the detachment, then slay them all, and return with Dirar ibn Azwar to the battlefield. And the Muslims had now also overcome the, what do you call this? The reinforcements, return them to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and with them Dirar ibn Azwar, so they did not win any moral victory by capturing one of the Muslim champions. And now they return to Damascus a day later. News reaches Thomas that no reinforcements are coming, that the reinforcements that were coming have been slain. So this then increases the dire situation of Thomas, knowing that nobody's coming to help them, and they are not prepared for a long siege, and the Muslims are prepared either to defeat them in battle or to starve them if they have to. In any case, we stop there, and we ask that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow these lessons to be that which inspire us to be better Muslims. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala render us of such quality that we are deserving of His nasr. We ask that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us the strength of brotherhood and sisterhood, that we become formidable in the face of our enemies. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala relieve the burden of those who are standing in His path and fighting for His cause, and grant His victory sooner rather than later. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us contentment with His decree, and allow us to realize the wisdom of Allah's plan. Subhanakallah wa bihamdik, ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilaik. Wassalamu alaikum. So sisters, if you move down first, inshallah.